When you go to the Holy Land, because I've been very blessed to go several times now, you experience 7 things, I'd say. And the first one is you experience a real challenge, a real physical and mental challenge. And I don't think some people really appreciate that, understand that going. It's not like going on a cruise. It's not like, renting an Airbnb at the beach or in the mountains and you sleep late and you sit on the porch with your coffee and watch the waves rolling in or the elk across the canyon. You're up early and you're walking. It's demanding. You're on a long flight. If you've never traveled overseas, that flight can be pretty long. And we do a lot of walking. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you have to be a triathlete. The oldest person on our trip this year was 83 and he did great. If you can walk up the steps of our church, then you're physically capable of doing anything that would be demanded of you on this trip. I'm just saying, be ready. We're going to walk. We're going to move fast. We've got a lot to cover. We assume that you might never be there again, so we're going to try to help you see as many things as you can. And so while physically that's demanding, it's also mentally challenging. You're drinking from a fire hose, so to speak. And if you don't take notes, you'll miss something. There's a challenge to it. The second thing you experience is, and this is going to sound dumb, but I'm going to say it anyway, very old things. In America, we think something like the Alamo is really old. Well, there's things in the Holy Land that are 10 times that old. Old in the Holy Land is measured in the thousands of years, not the hundreds of years. And so you'll see civilizations, you'll see buildings, you'll see temples, you'll see things constructed by Herod the Great all over Israel, palaces, castles, fortresses. You'll see ruins. Some of you, if you go to the Holy Land, you might discover that you should have been an archaeologist, that you're really fascinated. This is the experience that Carrie, my wife, had the first time. She didn't know she would be so into ruins and uncovering old civilizations. And so that's something you'll experience. You'll also, number 3, experience a lot of churches. There's churches all over the Holy Land. One of the things that disappointed me the first time I went, because I didn't expect it, is the Christians. When Christianity in the Roman Empire suddenly became legal in the 400s, the 4th century AD, all of a sudden churches had money. They could build church buildings. They'd never had that ability before. So what they did is they found places where important things in the Bible happened, and they built a church on top of them. I didn't expect that. I thought we'd go to the Holy Land, and you'd see, oh, this is where this happened, and this is how it looked. No, there's a church there. But now that I've been there more than once, I've learned to appreciate that. Number 1, that helps us know where things happened. And number 2, these churches are very beautiful, although very, very different than American churches. They're not set up the way ours are, because most churches over there aren't set up for preaching style worship. But they're beautiful, and I'll show you some pictures tonight. But third, it's just a useful reminder that people have been worshiping Jesus for thousands of years. We Baptists didn't come along until about 1,500 years after Jesus. And they've been worshiping Jesus in ways that you and I never even thought of, in languages and cultures and styles we never thought of. And I think that's a good reminder. Now, the 4th thing you experience is the geography of the Bible. I grew up with a Bible that my parents gave me, and it had maps in the back. I never looked at the maps. I never consulted. I never figured out where anything was. But you go to the Holy Land and you realize, when it says that Elijah went to Beersheba and then he walked 40 days, okay, that's the direction he was going. And when it says that Jesus was in Galilee and John was down in the Jordan, you see the difference in the landscapes between those two. When you see the walk to Emmaus, okay, well, we went to Emmaus. We know how far that is from Jerusalem and what that's like there. So from then on, whenever time you read a place name in the Bible, you go, okay, I can picture that. The 5th thing you experience, and this surprises a lot of people, is the fellowship you have with the group you travel with. Because we're a big church, and so most of the people on the trip are going to be people you don't previously know. And having those common experiences, even some challenges together, and eating every meal together almost, you're going to get to know each other, and you're going to make some friendships that last a lifetime, which is really, really special. And then number 6, and this is going to sound negative, but it's actually positive, you're going to know what it's like to feel like a foreigner. because you are definitely not in Kansas anymore. I mean, this is nothing like home, not even close. So every once in a while you see a McDonald's and you're like, whoa, home. But you learn the history of Israel that 99% of Americans don't know anything apart from the Bible about Israel. And that's what I'm going to talk about next Wednesday, by the way, is how Israel got where it is and why it is the way it is today. You see the different cultures, you see people, you see Muslims, you see Christians, you see Druze, you see Jewish people, you see people, Christians from all over the world. And you eat a lot of new food that's new to you. You can sneak out and get a hamburger once in a while. You can get a pizza once in a while, but mostly you're eating things you've never eaten. That's good. It's good to get out of your routine, believe it or not. The seventh thing you experience is God moments. These unexpected moments. I'll be honest, there are times where you might go to a place and you think, oh, that's disappointing. That's not the way I thought it would be. But then you turn around to a place you never even thought about in the Bible, and you have this moving experience that you never forget. Because here's the thing. I assume that people who go to the Holy Land don't think they're taking a vacation. They're going to connect with God. And when we go with a heart that says, I want to connect with God, He honors it. So, with that as the introduction, let's talk about our trip. Like I said, I'm going to go fast. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures. And let me just say this. This was a longer trip than we usually take because we saw Jordan and Israel. I don't think I'm ever going to try that again. That was a lot. That's a lot on our people. That's 15 days away from home. So I don't know that I'll ever do both Jordan and Israel again, but we did, and I want to show it to you. So we landed, start with this. Some of you may have heard of this. Getting on the plane was our real challenge because that was during our lovely government shutdown and TSA agents weren't getting paid. So it took us 6 hours standing in line at Intercontinental Airport to get on the airplane. 6 hours. Yeah, 2.5 of those were outside because that's how far the line was. I was not a fan of our government at that point, but I was really proud of our people because if they were mad and cussing and being ugly, they did it outside of my eyesight. They were very patient the whole time, and I was really proud of us. And I thought, well, okay, that's something. We've got a good group. So we finally got on the plane. Thank God they held it for us. We flew to Istanbul. We were supposed to have a layover there, but because of that delay, we didn't. From Istanbul, we went to Amman, Jordan. Because of the conflict, the October 7th conflict, people haven't been flying into Tel Aviv. International flights just haven't been landing in Tel Aviv. So we had to fly to Amman, Jordan. We landed. Our hotel there was on the Dead Sea. It was my first time in Jordan. The first place we went the next day was Mount Nebo. So Mount Nebo is the mountain that Moses went up just before his death to look over into the promised land. And this is the view he saw. Now, I should have said this at the beginning. Some of these pictures were taken by me. If you see a picture that looks like, wow, that's a really good picture, that means I didn't take it. I did not take this picture, but not just because I'm a bad photographer. The Holy Land, when we got there, was in the midst of an 8-month-long drought. And so there was dust in the air. I mean, this haze. So we went up on Mount Nebo, but you couldn't see very far. So the picture I took would not have looked good. This is a picture that was taken on a clear day. There's a Franciscan monastery up there, and we went inside. This is the inside of the church. It's the Memorial Church of Moses. I want you to notice there's pews, but then you see those columns on either side. Those columns go back to a church that was built in the Byzantine era, so just a few hundred years after Jesus. It's something you see a lot in the Holy Land. You see a building, a church that was built this century or last century, but they have elements in it. They preserved elements from ancient times. And so that was the case there. The church had this sign called the Serpentine Cross that you saw everywhere. It was based on the words of Jesus. Jesus was referring back to Moses' time when the children of Israel were bit by the snakes in the desert. And God said, put a bronze snake on a pole Anybody who looks at the snake will be healed. Look it up. I promise it's in the Bible. Jesus said, just like they lifted up the snake in the desert, they will lift me up, and everyone who comes to me will be saved. And so that was the symbol of that church. I thought that was kind of interesting. So the next place we went was called Madaba. Madaba in Jordan. Madaba is known as the town of mosaics. And I'll show you a mosaic in just a moment. But we went to a school there where they teach mosaic art where they take little stones and they place them to make the art. They're not painting, they're not drawing, they're doing it by gluing stones to wood or canvas or whatever the case may be. So the Church of St. George, ancient church there, we toured. What's famous about it is this next picture. Originally, the whole floor of the church was just a massive mosaic map of the Holy Land. And this is part of that map. In fact, what you see in the picture, that kind of oval shape, that's Jerusalem. But the whole Holy Land used to cover the floor of that church, and it was pretty impressive. After that, we drove. Being in Jordan, you see the Old Testament land of Moab, and then you go south to the Old Testament land of Edom. We got to float in the Dead Sea. In case you're wondering, yes, you really do float. When you sit back in the Dead Sea, you feel like you're sitting in a recliner, a really comfortable recliner. There's a picture of me doing that. I will spare you the sight of my pasty white skin, but I am floating like I'm sitting on a mattress. It's the weirdest feeling. We went by a place called Macareus. I didn't get a good picture of Macareus, but there was a castle there built by Herod the Great. His son Herod Antipas held John the Baptist in prison there and ultimately beheaded him. But that just kind of tells you the distances of the Holy Land. John was actually held in prison in present-day Jordan. Now, the next place we went, I really want to show you. Anybody ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Otherwise known as the last good Indiana Jones movie, right? Okay, so last scene when Indiana Jones finds the Holy Grail. Spoiler, sorry, he finds the Holy Grail and it's in this building. Except not really. That's the exterior. The part Indiana Jones goes inside is on a Hollywood soundstage, but this is Petra in southern Jordan, and this is known as the Treasury Building. Now, the amazing thing about this is that was carved out of stone. They didn't build that. They took rock and carved it. They call it the Treasury Building because when the people first found it, they assumed that's what it was, but it's actually a tomb. Somebody was buried there. And of course, that's our group standing in front of it. Petra it was a city built by a people called the Nabateans. The Nabateans were an Arab tribe that came up from the Sinai Peninsula and conquered the southern part of the Holy Land 400 years before Jesus and held it until about 100 years after. The only real mention of the Nabateans in the Bible, and it's not really a mention of them, it's their king. In 2 Corinthians, I wrote it down. 2 Corinthians 11:32, Paul mentions when he first got saved, and he was in Damascus, and the king there wanted to put him to death, and remember they had to lower Paul out of the Damascus city in a basket. That was King Aretas, the king of the Nabateans. Their kingdom went all the way up to Damascus at that time. So their capital city was Petra. So when you visit Petra, you walk about 1.5 miles, and here's where you walk. You walk down this canyon, these steep rocks on either side of you. And I think that's an optical illusion. I don't really think that woman has legs that long. But you're walking you're walking downhill, so it's not a hard walk. And then you get to that building, right? And then you can either head back or you can go another 1.5 miles further. Most of us went another 1.5 miles further, and we saw all along the way, we saw the ancient city of Petra. So we saw tombs like this all around. These are not houses, they're tombs. And so we made it the other 1.5 miles, so now we're 3 miles away from our hotel. And the people who were in charge of the tour were like, okay, everybody get on a golf cart and ride back. And everybody did because they were smart. But me and Carrie and Gerald Hollis said, no, we're walking back. And so we hiked up to one of the tombs, or several of them. This is one of the entrance to one of the tombs. Let me show you what it looked like inside. I mean, massive and crazy colors, the rock inside. So yeah, I may never go back to Jordan, but I'm glad I went to Petra. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Made it back and slept well that night. The next day we got up and we left. We went to a place in the southern part of Jordan called the Wadi Rum Desert, R-U-M, Wadi Rum Desert. This rock formation that's pictured here, the Arabs called the Seven Pillars of Wisdom. It's also the name of the autobiography of Lawrence of Arabia. And that's appropriate because this desert is where that movie was filmed. If you've ever seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, it's also part of the territory that the Israelites wandered in under Moses for 40 years. And it's beautiful, but it's also, you can see, it's desolate. So a couple of pictures here. Most of us rode some camels. That's our group off in the distance. And then here's a close-up, and that's my courageous wife with her hands up in the air. I did not ride a camel. I didn't have any desire, have no regrets. So, but that happened in Wadi Rum. We got on, we took a quote-unquote safari. We got in the backs of some Toyota pickups, and they rode us around, and we walked around in the desert, and it was neat. So from there, it was time to head to Israel. So let me just show you a map real quick, just to give you some perspective. So you see Amman, Jordan, up there at the top, and then Petra, where we were, and then that star at the bottom, that's the city of Aqaba. Again, if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, you've seen Aqaba on the screen. So we go to Aqaba, we go through a checkpoint on the Jordanian side, then we walk our baggage across the border, and we go through another checkpoint on the Israeli side in a town called Eilat, and then we're in Israel. But our day was not yet done because we had to drive all the way up to Tel Aviv. So we covered just about all of Israel that day. We were in a nice bus. It wasn't a hard trip, but halfway up there, you go through a little town called Beersheba, and that's where we picked up Aviv, our tour guide, and he rode with us the rest of the way. It was great to see him. Tel Aviv is a relatively new city. It was built by the Jewish citizens of the British Mandate of Israel in the early 1900s. So there was an Arab city there called Jaffa, biblical Jaffa, that I'm going to talk about in a moment. The Jews said, we want a Jewish city. We want a city where we can speak Hebrew and nothing but Hebrew, where we can just be ourselves. And they built the little city of Tel Aviv. And now Tel Aviv is the big city and Jaffa is the suburb. We woke up the next morning in Jaffa, and right near our hotel, that's a soccer stadium in the back. And it was kind of jarring to think, for the last 4 days, we've basically been in the third world. And Jordan's a lovely country. The people there are lovely people, very friendly. But Israel is much more advanced, much more prosperous. And so it's like you woke up and you were back in civilization. Jaffa is a neat city. This is the port of Jaffa. So this is where Jonah boarded his ship and fled from the Lord. This is where Simon Peter stayed with Simon the tanner and had his vision of that sheep being let down from heaven and God commanding him to kill and eat the unclean animals. What I love about this picture, and by the way, that's the Mediterranean Sea, beautiful, crystal clear blue. But what I love about this picture is in the foreground, you see Jaffa. You see those old buildings. It's an old city. In the distance, you see the high-rise towers of Tel Aviv. I think that sums up what you get in Israel because you get the ancient and the modern. You get something that's been around for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and you get places that make you feel like, oh, this is a modern place. From Jaffa, we went to Caesarea. Caesarea is just down the coast a little bit, also a port city. Caesarea is interesting because it was built by Herod the Great as an attempt to schmooze the Romans. He named it Caesarea because he was naming it after Caesar. He made it as much like a Roman city as he could because the Romans didn't like Jerusalem. Jerusalem was very Jewish. It was very religious. It was very straight-laced, and everything was up to Jewish code. but Caesarea was like a Roman city. What you're looking at is a Roman-style theater where they could have plays and operas and all kinds of things. There's a hippodrome, which I'll show you in a minute, where they had chariot races, like in Ben-Hur, gladiatorial games. There were statues, idols all over the place, bathhouses. He wanted the Romans to feel at home. And so Rome made it their territorial capital. This is the city where Pontius Pilate lived and all the other Roman governors. They would come to Jerusalem when they had to, but this is where they lived. True or false? I took this picture. Y'all are smart people. So the reason I show you this, you see on the left, that's the hippodrome, that little oval. You see the theater up there too. But in the foreground is the remains of Herod's palace. So Herod built this amazing palace right on the water. And the part you see extending out into the water is part of his harbor. And you can see where he had a swimming pool. Now, back in the day, that was a freshwater swimming pool. Now, you've got more money than sense if you're building a freshwater swimming pool out over the Mediterranean Sea. But that was Herod. It was all about showing his greatness through his construction. This next thing was something I'd never done before that was really powerful for me. This is the prison underneath Herod's palace where the Apostle Paul was kept for 2 years. This is where he disputed with Felix and Festus, the two Roman governors, and just waited to be sent to Rome for his trial before Caesar. So imagine being 2 years in that basic dungeon. From there, we went to the Sea of Galilee, and I'll show you, just to make you jealous, where we got to stay while we were in Galilee. This is, Ein Gev is a kibbutz. You can look that up if you don't know what a kibbutz is. And they run this little hotel by the Sea of Galilee. We got to stay in these nice little cabins along the sea, and it was very, very nice. The next day, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes. I didn't get a good picture of that, but we were up on overlooking the Sea of Galilee, the place where they presume. And this is something I told somebody just a minute ago. One of the great things about Aviv is he'll tell you if, we don't really know. We don't really know this is where this happened. And that's the case with the Mount of Beatitudes. It's a mount that makes sense, that it could have been where Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount. Either way, it was a beautiful view, and it gave me a chance to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. But from there, we went to Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is no longer a city. In fact, it was lost to time for 2,000 years and was found midway through the 20th century. And when you go there today, there's a sign on the outside that says, Capernaum, the town of Jesus. Because you may not have realized this, when you read the Gospels, pay attention. Jesus did most of his ministry in and around Capernaum. Those of you that have been to Israel know that I just did an Aviv. Pay attention. But yeah, so Jesus lived in Capernaum, probably in the home of Simon Peter, who was from there. This is in Capernaum. That looks like a spaceship. Again, I took the picture, so it's not a very good one, but it's an octagonal-shaped church. Guess what it was built on top of? Anybody guess? Peter's house. That's right, Peter's house. So if Peter's wife was angry at those guys tearing a hole in her roof, well, how would she feel about a church on top of her house? Anyway, this is a Catholic church. This is our group inside there. It's an actual church. You see the altar and the pulpit. But that area where everybody's lined up at the rail, there's a hole there. There's a glass floor, basically, where you can look down into Peter's house, the stone structure that we believe with a high degree of likelihood was the house of Simon Peter. And the cool thing is, it doesn't look like much because it's 2,000 years old, but you walk out of there and you take maybe a 2-minute walk and you're standing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And you go, oh, so when Peter got up in the morning or in the middle of the night and he went to his boat, this is where he went. And you go the opposite way and you're standing in the synagogue where he worshiped, where Jesus healed the demon-possessed man, and that drew all that attention to him. So Capernaum is one of my favorite places. From there, we went to a place called Magdala. This is one of the more recent discoveries. Up until this century, no one knew where Magdala was. And then the Catholic Church bought some property on the shores of the Sea of Galilee and wanted to build a resort hotel there. And here's the thing about Israel. If you start building something or digging and you find an artifact, construction stops. And all of the archaeologists show up. So the Catholic Church had to back off for a while, and they uncovered the city of Magdala, probably where Mary Magdalene was from. Here's the cool thing. So we looked all over this little city, and you learn a lot about those people. They were very devout. They were also pretty wealthy. But this is what you see in front of you is the synagogue in Magdala. The Gospels tell us that Jesus taught in all the synagogues in Galilee. So Jesus almost certainly stood there, almost certainly taught there. That's amazing to see. The Catholics did end up building their hotel, after all, just not over Magdala, just beside it. After that, we went to a museum. We saw this fishing boat, which was discovered in the Sea of Galilee and very carefully preserved. It took great effort to dredge it up out of the mud and not destroy it. The boat, wood. The water and mud preserved it. So the minute they brought it out of there, it started to deteriorate. So they covered it in this foam to protect it and then floated it in that foam to the museum and then, carefully took that off. It was quite a procedure. And it gives you an indication of how small the fishing boats were that this is a first century fishing boat of the time of Jesus. We took a boat trip, not in this one. We took a boat trip on the Sea of Galilee, this time for the first time ever. It was calm. Every other time I've been on the Sea of Galilee, it's been windy and rough. This time it was calm and beautiful. The next day, we went to a place called Zippori. In biblical times, it was called Sepphoris. It's not mentioned in the New Testament, but Sepphoris was only 5 or 6 miles from Nazareth. It was being built. It was a new city in the time of Jesus. And the reason it's significant is because it's so close to Nazareth and because they were building, wealthy people were moving there. They were building nice houses and other kinds of buildings. It's very likely that Joseph and Jesus worked there, that they got up and made that walk from Nazareth to Sepphoris to build. I just took this one picture, and yes, I did take this. That's called the Mona Lisa of Galilee. It's a mosaic artwork on someone's floor that lived in Sepphoris in biblical times. So obviously this person was loaded. Absolutely rich beyond all imagination. From there, we went to Nazareth, the city that Jesus grew up in. Nazareth is an Israeli city, but it's almost entirely Arab Israelis. They're Israeli citizens, but they are not Jewish. It used to be majority Christian. It's still there's probably more Christians in Nazareth than any other city in Israel. We went there. We went to the town square where we learned about the name Nazareth. It comes from the Hebrew word netzer, which means branch. Matthew 2:23 has baffled people because it says that Joseph brought Jesus to his hometown of Nazareth. So just as the prophet said, he would be called a Nazarene. And scholars have read that and said, it doesn't say that anywhere in the Old Testament. Why does Matthew say that? Well, here's why. Because Jeremiah says that God will bring a branch from the root of David. You know how you chop a tree down and then shoots pop up? That's what he was talking about. The line of David was destroyed, but there will be a branch that pops out, and that's the Messiah. Well, guess what Nazareth means? Town of the branch. So Jesus is that branch. We went to the Church of the Annunciation. This is maybe my favorite church in the Holy Land. I just want to show you what I like about it. I don't have a picture of the outside of it, but on the bottom level, which is basically underground, behind that altar that you see there, there's a grotto, a little cave. Tradition says, and there's evidence to indicate that early Christians believed that's where Gabriel appeared to Mary. So it's called the Church of the Annunciation, not because it teaches you to enunciate well, okay? But an annunciation, like announcement. This is where the announcement of the birth of the Messiah was. And so that's on the very bottom. You can go down there, you can pray, you can meditate. Then you go up to the ground level. which is up on top. This is where the worship is. This is where the pews are. This is where the pulpit is. But what's in the foreground is, again, an open space. So you can look down at the grotto. So yeah, you're worshiping, and then you get up and you walk over and you look over the rail and you see where the angel visited Mary. And then you look up and you see this beautiful ceiling. And the idea is, by the way, when you go outside and you look at the exterior, it looks like a lighthouse. It's built like a lighthouse. And so the idea behind the architecture is that the light of the Messiah starts at the bottom where he was announced, goes up to the top, and then spreads out through the whole world. I think that's kind of cool. And then we went to my favorite part of Nazareth, which is Mount Precipice. Okay, do you think I took that picture? No, I didn't take that picture. Again, you couldn't really see. Mount Precipice is out on the outskirts of Nazareth. It's not really a mountain, but it's a high place. And Aviv takes us out there to show us that Jesus grew up surrounded by biblical history, because from that spot, you can see that's the Jezreel Valley that you're looking at. That's where lots of battles took place that are mentioned in the scriptures. The hill you see in front of you is Mount Tabor, where Deborah rallied the Israelites. Deborah and Barak rallied the Israelites to fight against the Canaanites. You can also see, although not in this picture, you can see Mount Gilboa, where Saul and his sons were killed by the Philistines. And you can see Mount Moreh. And all kinds of things happen on Mount Moreh. That's where Abraham built an altar when he first came to the Holy Land. That's where the city of Shunem was once there, where Elisha raised a woman's son who had died. And on the other side of the mountain was the New Testament city of Nain, where Jesus raised a widow's son to life. That's where Gideon rallied his troops to fight the Midianites. So, Aviv's point is Jesus grows up seeing all these places and hearing all these stories. And it's amazing to think about that. All right, so the next day we got up and we went to a spot on the Jordan called Yardenit, and we had baptisms. And that's Carolyn. She got baptized that day, and 2 other people on our trip got baptized. Now, the Jordan, a lot of people are surprised, maybe disappointed to learn, is not very big. It's more of a creek. This is a good spot for baptisms because there's actually more water there than in other parts. They rent us these robes. We didn't get to take them home. Darn. But it was a beautiful moment. Ask Terry about his baptism. He had an interesting experience. So if you get baptized in the Jordan, wear water shoes. That's all I'm going to say. So, all right. So from there, we went to Emmaus. We stopped at Emmaus for a little while. There's a monastery there. We saw some ruins and some tombs. And then we drove on to my favorite city on earth, which is the old city of Jerusalem. Got there. It was dark soon after. I have this tradition now that when I first get to Jerusalem, I go to the Western Wall, and because the Western Wall is really beautiful by night. And so I did take this picture of the Western Wall and the people praying up next to it. The next day we woke up and took a tour of the old city. This is a bird's eye view from the Tower of David, which, by the way, David didn't build, but that's another story. Off in the distance, past the Golden Dome, which I'll talk about later, that's the Mount of Olives. Now, let me talk about the old city of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's a massive modern city, but right in the middle is the old city, the city that's been around for thousands of years. And it's been walled since the time of David. The current walls, because they've been knocked down time and time again, were built in the 1500s by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman. Today, old city of Jerusalem is separated into 4 quarters. The largest and oldest and most populated is the Muslim quarter. You see there's a Christian quarter and a Jewish quarter and then an Armenian quarter. I don't have time to tell you about why the Armenians get a whole quarter to themselves, but you can ask me later. And then you see the Temple Mount. So that's where we spent several days. Let me show you a little bit about what that's like. Here's a picture of the street in front of our hotel. We stayed in the Glory Hotel in the Christian Quarter, Gloria Hotel. You can't really tell, but those lights up there say Merry Christmas. So they had Christmas lights hanging. There's a little pizza place right there. In the foreground, there's a jewelry store where Carrie got ramrodded into buying some jewelry. So, and I didn't help. That's the street in front of our hotel. This is another street in the Old City. That's Aviv right there on the left. On the right, you see those blue, what looks like blue panels? Those are stalls where shops are. We're up early in the morning, so the shops aren't open yet. But about mid-morning, 9:30 or so, the shop owners come and unlock those and swing the doors open, and inside there's spices, or there's clothing, or leather, or hardware, or meat, or whatever this person sells. And so in the Old City, you walk through this long section where it's just markets and shops. But that gives you an indication of what the Old City's like. Those cobblestones, old streets. On the left, you might see it says Jaffa Gate. That's where we stayed. Our hotel was near the Jaffa Gate. And that's the most famous entrance to Old City of Jerusalem. So just picture, you're in this atmosphere and you feel like you've gone back in time. And then you walk out the Jaffa Gate and you experience this. This is the Mamilla Mall. Mamilla is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, and it's like a modern shopping center. There's a Gap there, for goodness sakes. There's a great ice cream shop that Carrie and I always like to go to. So yeah, that's ancient and modern. That's Jerusalem. For Christians, the most famous site in Jerusalem is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is the exterior of that church. It's been there since the 400s AD. Very complicated history. I think there's 6 different Christian denominations that run the Holy Sepulchre. None of them have the key. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But because these 6 denominations are there, and they mostly coexist harmoniously, but there's never a renovation done, because if the Syriacs wanted to renovate, well, then the Coptics would get upset, and if they wanted to remove that ladder from the roof, the Catholics would say, hey, that's our ladder. And so everything is just kind of frozen in time. It's an interesting situation. Again, not like an American church. There's no pews. There's no pulpit. Let me show you what you find inside. The first thing you see inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is this stone. It's called the stone of anointing, or the stone of unction. I know unction is a word we use all the time. But it's believed to be, you hear me, believed to be. I don't know that there's any evidence. That's the stone that they laid the body of Jesus on to anoint him for burial after he was dead. And so people come in and they bow before it. But then you walk up some stairs, you see that table in the foreground. Underneath that table, you have to get down on your hands and knees to see it really. There's a hole in the floor, and that's where it is believed the cross of Christ was placed into the rock of Golgotha. There's strong evidence to indicate this church is in the area where Golgotha was. We don't know that that's the exact spot where the cross was placed. But I've heard the argument from Aviv. He believes it probably took place around that part of Jerusalem. You notice the icons and the lamps. This area is overseen by the Greek Orthodox, and you see a lot of that there. I'm not into the smells and bells, so it kind of took me back for a while, but still, I'm glad to go there now and see where it happened. There's places where you can see the rock of Golgotha, the stone that's been cracked from an earthquake. It's interesting. Now, the main feature at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is this. That big structure is covering what they believe is the empty tomb of Christ. I'd never been inside there before. And this is the sad thing about this trip. When we got home, people asked me, were you safe there? We were very safe. I never felt in any danger. In fact, it felt no different than any other time I've been to Israel. You wouldn't have known there was a war, except there were almost no tourists. So I've never been able to get into the empty tomb because there's always a line that goes out the door. This time we walked right in, which was nice for us, but also sad for the people of the Holy Land. So this is on the outside. I told you that none of the churches have the key. Do you see the guy sitting down that everybody's looking at? He has the key. I'm not making this up. This guy's last name is Nusaiba. The Nusaiba family has lived in the Holy Land for hundreds of years. Since the time, they were one of the prominent Muslim families of Jerusalem in the days of the Crusades, when Salah ad-Din conquered the city and took it back from the Christian crusaders. He said very mercifully, very kindly, I'm not going to destroy the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm going to continue to let Christians worship there, but I'm not going to let them have the keys. And so he gave the keys to the Nasiba family. The keys have been in this family for hundreds of years. So every morning, this guy or one of his sons comes before dawn and unlocks the Holy Sepulchre. And every night after sundown, he comes back and locks it up again. When Carrie Kaylee and I went on my sabbatical, we went and watched him do it. It's really crazy. But he's been asked, why don't you give the keys to the Christians? And he always says, which Christians? Think about that for a minute. The next day we went to Bethlehem. First place we went to in Bethlehem was an Arab restaurant where we ate this dish called makluba. Makluba is the Arab word for upside down. And what they do is they take chicken and rice and vegetables and they cook them in a big pot for hours and hours, and then they bring them out to you and they flip it upside down on the table. And it's like an Arab shrimp boil, right? It just kind of, you've got this big pile of rice and chicken and vegetables, and it's really good. So just said that to make you jealous. Then we went to Beit Sahor, which is a little Christian village outside Bethlehem. Beit Sahor in Arabic means place of the watchers, because they believe that's where the shepherds were when the night Jesus was born. This place we're sitting is a church that was built inside a cave in Beit Sahor. The ceiling is black because for centuries people have been coming there and worshiping and lighting candles and incense, and it's blackened the inside of that cave. The man speaking to us is a guy named Rafa. Rafa is an Arab Christian, like almost all the Christians in Israel. He is Arab. We saw him in 2020. Those of you who went with us back then remember Rafa. He's a great guy and a very, very good guide. But Rafa was different this time. The last 2 years of war have been a hardship for him and his people, and so he spent about half his time talking to us about what they've gone through. It was eye-opening. I wish he would have spent more time doing what he did before, but still, I understand we needed to hear his perspective on what life is like. We went to another chapel there in Beit Sahor called the Shepherd's Field Chapel. Like I said, a lot of these churches are very beautiful. This is an example. This is a small one, but we sang Angels We Have Heard on High, and it sounded beautiful because of the acoustics inside there. And then we went to the main attraction in Bethlehem, which is the Church of the Nativity, which again, strong evidence indicates is over the grotto where Jesus was born. At the very least, when Helen, the mother of Constantine, in the year 300 something, don't quiz me on it, came to Bethlehem and said, where was Jesus born? All the Christians there said, right here. And the Romans had built a temple on top of it to try to persuade Christians not to worship there. So there's indication. Anyway, a church has been there ever since. What I like about this picture, this is the entrance, the only entrance to the Church of the Nativity. You see the arch, kind of faint up there? That's the door that existed in the Middle Ages. But people who weren't Christians would sometimes ride their horses into the church, and so they made a smaller door. And then they realized, let's make an even smaller door so everyone who comes in has to bow. And they call it the door of humiliation. I think there's something beautiful about that. This is the interior of the Church of the Nativity. It's actually 3 churches. This is the Greek Orthodox portion. And again, every other time I've been there, there's a line almost out the door. This time we were the only ones there. What everybody usually is waiting in line for is this. This is the grotto where they believe Jesus was born. Down under that red area, there's a star with, 14 points. I don't count them, but it's a silver star on the floor where they believe the manger was placed, and people line up to see it. So you go down into the grotto, you see the birthplace, and then you come up the other side, and there's this little chapel where the Armenians worship, And then you walk a little further and there's a Catholic church, which I should have gotten a picture of but didn't. Looks completely different. And that's the one, if you ever watch the midnight mass from Jerusalem on Christmas Eve, it takes place there in St. Catherine's. Then we went back to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the next day, we went to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't excited about going to the Holocaust Museum because I've been to one here in Houston, but it's different going to one in Israel. Our guide was actually an American Jewish woman who moved to Israel. They call it making Aliyah, when a Jewish person from somewhere else in the world immigrates to Israel. She immigrated in the 1980s, made Aliyah. She's a citizen there now. She's a New Yorker, but now she's an Israeli. And she did a great job. Her name was Bernice, same name as my grandmother, and really told the story well. What happens when you go to the Holocaust Museum in Israel, Yad Vashem, you get the idea, oh, now I understand why there needs to be a nation called Israel. There needs to be a homeland for the Jewish people. And then we went to the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives is just across the Kidron Valley from Jerusalem. You recognize names you've read in the Bible, but once you're there, you go, okay, now I can picture it. The Mount of Olives on the other side, which we didn't go to, is the little village. It's now an Arab village of Bethany, where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived. Jesus stayed on the Mount of Olives the entire week before his crucifixion and made the walk you see in front of you, every day into Jerusalem. Okay, so look up there. What you see right in front of you, this is a picture taken from the Mount of Olives. That's the Temple Mount. You see the Golden Dome, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's where the temple was. That's where the Temple of Solomon and then later the temple built by Zerubbabel and renovated by Herod sat on that exact spot. That whole rectangle is the Temple Mount complex. When you read in the Bible about Jesus cleansing the temple, he was cleansing that big area to the left of the Golden Dome. He was chasing out the money changers from that area. The wall around there, I said the wall around Jerusalem is from the 1500s. Not that one. That's from the time of Jesus. I took another picture from the same spot and kind of zoomed out just so you could see in the foreground, you see those white kind of rectangles or squares on the ground right in front of me? Those are Jewish tombs. Observant Jews believe that when the Messiah comes, there will be a resurrection. And they think it'll start first on the Mount of Olives. So if you're an observant Jew and you've got money, this is where you get buried. When you're there, you look and you see there are rocks on top of the tombs. They're external to the ground, right? Kind of like New Orleans. But if you've ever seen Schindler's List, you know the rocks are there as a sign that, hey, somebody visited. You leave a rock because flowers blow away, flowers die, but a rock stays. The fortunate thing is there was a big rain that day, first rain in 8 months. It cleared the skies. I was able to take good pictures of Jerusalem. The unfortunate thing is the rain came back. So when we got to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is Carrie's favorite place, and definitely in my top 5, we really couldn't spend much time there. But so this was a picture I actually took the last time I was in Jerusalem, not this past time. Those are the actual olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane, hundreds of years old. And when you're there, you really can picture Jesus, forehead on the ground, praying to the Father, Lord, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. It's a very, very moving place. You turn around and there's a church there, one of the more beautiful churches in Israel called the Church of All Nations. So Carrie took that one because that gray-headed guy is me. And then you see the person at the end of the aisle or the row near the front of the church. Right in front of them, there's this rock that they believe was the place where Jesus knelt to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then the altar. What I love about this church is the ceilings. They're just beautiful. That blue is just dazzling. The next day we got on the bus and drove way south, down around the Dead Sea again to this place. I did not take that picture either. And I did not discover the ability to fly on this trip. But this is Masada. Masada was built as a fortress by Herod the Great. Herod had a ton of palaces all over Israel. This was his in case of fire, break this glass kind of place. I mean, if all hell broke loose and I lost everything, this is the place he would run to keep himself safe. No one can get to me there. You have to get up there by cable car. You can walk, but we didn't. We took a cable car to the top. What made Masada famous is after Herod was dead, a group of zealots, cutthroats called the Sicarii, occupied that place and held out against the Romans for 2 or 3 years. So it's kind of the Jewish Alamo, although they were not good guys. This is our group on top of Masada. You might be able to see in the distance the Dead Sea behind us. After that, I didn't get any pictures of it, but we went to Qumran, where the young Bedouin men found the Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave out in the middle of nowhere. So we saw that. And then we came back to Jerusalem and came to the Garden Tomb. Late 1800s, if you're a history nerd, you probably know the name of Charles Gordon, General Gordon, Chinese Gordon, they also called him. It's a military hero of the English. He was visiting Jerusalem, staying in the American colony, looked out the window of the hotel and saw in the rock a hill outside his hotel room. And he said, boy, that sure looks like a skull. There was 2 holes that looked like eyes and 1 hole that looked like a nose of a skull. And he thought, I wonder if that's Calvary. Of course, people have always believed that it was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but Gordon was convinced. And so they did some excavations, and guess what? They found an olive press, and they found this empty tomb that dates to the 1st century. It's today run by a British Christian organization. We had a lovely English woman who guided us through the Garden Tomb and told us all about it and told us all the reasons why this could be the place. But what I love about them is they say, okay, here's the arguments. You decide whether it happened here or not. What matters is it happened. And the good thing about the Garden Tomb is, as opposed to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they've kept it the way it looked in the 1st century, other than planting a lot of really pretty plants around. But this is the way a 1st century tomb looked. You can even see the groove in front where the stone would roll. And then the inside looks like this. Obviously, the bars weren't there in the 1st century, but you go inside and you think, okay, when Peter and John came running, bumbled into the tomb and they looked inside, this is what it would have looked like, except for some grave clothes and the head covering folded up neatly and set to the side. Afterwards, they gave us a little chapel for us to share communion, and it was a very special place to take the Lord's Supper. Our last day in Jerusalem, we went to the Western Wall, which I've already shown you. People often say, oh, well, that the reason Jews pray there and the reason it's so special is it's all that's left of the temple. That's not true. I already showed you. The whole Temple Mount, the whole wall around the temple is still there. What's special about the Western Wall is it's the wall that was closest to where the original temple was. And for centuries and centuries, it's all the Jews had. They didn't have Jerusalem. They didn't have Israel. But the Muslims let them come and pray at the Western Wall. And that's why back then it was known as the Wailing Wall. Today, now that Israel has come back into the hands of the Jewish people, it's just called the Western Wall. So we saw that, and then we went around the side to the southern steps. These are the southern steps where we're sitting right here. And you see the Mount of Olives in the distance. Southern steps, in ancient times, in biblical times, these were the steps that Jesus and others would have taken to get to the Temple Mount. So when Jesus made his triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem and then went into the temple, this is where he went. This is where he walked. It's no longer used because at the top of the southern steps is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it was really special to sit there. It still looks like ancient steps, which is what it is. The last thing we saw was the Temple Mount. Let me give you some orientation of that. That long wall right there is the Western Wall. And there's a plaza out in front of it. You see that little barrier in front of halfway through the plaza. That's where, when you go through that plaza, if you're a man, you have to have your head covered. That's where Jewish people go and they worship and they pray against the wall. You see what looks like a tube or a staircase on the right, kind of curving around that rock. That's the entrance to the Temple Mount. All right, Temple Mount's the most complicated place in Jerusalem. For centuries, the Muslims controlled Jerusalem. Even after and I'll talk in more detail about this next Wednesday. Even after the founding of the modern state of Israel, they still control, the Palestinians, the Jordanians actually, controlled the Temple Mount. Six-Day War in 1967, the Israelis took Jerusalem, and they took the Temple Mount. Y'all remember Moshe Dayan, the guy with the eye patch? He was the minister of defense, and he just unilaterally sat down with the Muslim leaders and said, listen, I don't want any trouble. I'm going to give it back to you. It's basically, we want there to be peace. So we will let you run the Temple Mount. So today, the Islamic Waqf runs the Temple Mount. The whole thing is considered a mosque. But the Israelis provide the security. So when you get into that tube and you're walking up, you go through two different security checkpoints. They're not really worried about guns and bombs and knives. They're worried that one of us is going to bring a Bible or a menorah or a shofar or something that's going to cause religious disturbance on the Temple Mount. So you go through and you get to that top checkpoint right before you go in, and the policemen there are not the 18-year-old kids holding assault rifles. They're guys who've been around a while because they want to make sure nothing bad happens. The last big trouble in Jerusalem happened because the prime minister of Israel just decided to bring his entourage onto the Temple Mount. So it's a testy place. It's the one place in Jerusalem I get a little nervous about going on. But you go there and you see the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the right, you see this big plaza, and then you see the Dome of the Rock. Dome of the Rock is where Muslims believe Muhammad ascended into heaven, had a vision, and then came back down. Just so happens that happened right where the Jerusalem temple stood for centuries. So this big building, the Dome of the Rock, the actual temple that Herod built was 3 times as tall. It's a massive. Now here's what I love. It's a beautiful building. It's not a mosque, it's a shrine. The gold dome was actually donated by the King of Jordan back in the 1990s. Before that, it was just kind of gray. Here's what I love about it. In an effort to sort of wipe out the history of the temple, what they've done is actually say, hey, here's where the temple was. There's this beautiful building, kind of the symbol of modern Jerusalem, and you go, okay, that's where the temple was. We'll never forget where the temple was, where Jesus cleansed the temple, where all the things that happened that I preached about last year, which I'm sure you remember every one of those sermons. It took place in that spot. And it's beautiful, and it's a reminder of God's goodness. So from there, we got back on our bus. Let me tell you about our little adventure. We drove back into Jordan. And this is why I don't ever want to do Jordan and Israel again. So the Jordanians, again, lovely people. Jordan is the Switzerland of the Middle East. There's no trouble there. But we had some trouble at the checkpoint. First, we didn't know that there was some kind of big event happening in Saudi Arabia. So there were a lot of Palestinians headed out on buses too. We had to wait for those buses to get through the checkpoint first. And then it was our turn to check out, to go through. And they run our bags through this security. Well, they discovered some of our folks had a menorah in their suitcase, and others had T-shirts with Hebrew writing on them. So they confiscated that stuff. And then they said, okay, you can get it back, but there's some rigmarole you have to go through. And one of you needs to be responsible for this. Gerald Hollis said, I'll do it. He's my hero. He's here tonight. I said it in front of him. And he said, yeah, I'll take responsibility. So Gerald had to go through all this stuff. I won't go into it, but it took us a long time to get through. And we did. And then we made it to Amman. Nice hotel the night before we were flying out the next day. They were having a wedding there, and I've never been to an Arab wedding. Didn't know they played bagpipes. They do. It was really loud. It was really festive. It sounded like a lot of fun. I did not crash the party. And we had a great meal, and then got up at 2 a.m. to fly home. So that's our trip. I'll just show you this last picture, which I did not take. That's Tel Aviv. So pray for Israel. Pray that tourism returns. Well, pray most of all for the believers in Jesus in Israel, most of whom are Arab. There are Messianic Jews there, and there are Christians born elsewhere who've come. But pray that the Christians of the Holy Land are not united. Politics has divided the Christians of the Holy Land along Israeli and Palestinian lines. Pray that there would be revival there, that they would overcome those differences and share the gospel effectively, and people be saved. So next week, what I plan to do is talk about the history of Israel. I'll talk a little bit about scriptural Israel, but mainly, how did we get from there to here? What happened in the intervening years? How did the modern nation of Israel get started? What's the reason for the conflict between Jews and Palestinians? And mainly, what is we as Christians, what is our responsibility regarding Israel? Because you hear different things depending on who you talk to. So hope you'll be here for that. And if you're not, it'll be recorded. Carrie's holding up the book. So I wrote a novel about a guy who goes to Jerusalem and ends up going back in time. That's your synopsis. If you're interested, she's got copies, and some of my other books are back there too, including American Idols. So if you want one, they're here. Might be some next week too.